Objection. Karen's lawyer, a stiff man in a gray suit, shot up from his seat. This is an attempt to humiliate a decorated officer. She was doing her job. The judge raised his gavel. Silence. He turned back to Karen. Well, Officer Willis, you've been given a chance to defend yourself. Karen cleared her throat, finally finding her voice. Your Honor, I was following standard procedure. The suspect fit the description. The judge's eyes narrowed. You mean the description you made up? Whispers rippled through the courtroom. Karen's hands trembled under the table. Enough. The judge cut her off. We will take a brief recess. When we return, I expect a full explanation. His gavel slammed down. Court dismissed for 20 minutes. The moment the judge left, the courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters scrambled for interviews. People whispered furiously among themselves. Some of the officers at the back quickly stood and left, wanting no part of what was happening. Karen shot up from her seat, her face red with anger. She stormed over to Greg Tully, who looked just as rattled. What the hell just happened? She hissed. Greg swallowed hard. I don't know. That footage. Karen grabbed his wrist, squeezing hard. No one was supposed to see that. Greg pulled his arm free, looking around nervously. They saw it, Karen. We're screwed. Jamal watched from his seat. For the first time since the arrest, he saw something in Karen's eyes that hadn't been there before. Fear. His mother turned to him, squeezing his hand. We're going to win this, baby, she whispered. Jamal swallowed the lump in his throat. He wanted to believe her, but something about the way Karen's eyes darted around the room told him that this wasn't over. Not even close. 3 days earlier, Karen Willis had started her morning like any other. Coffee, a cigarette on her front porch, and the usual grumbling about these streets going to hell. She'd always loved her job. It gave her power, authority, and she liked reminding people like Jamal where they stood. She never thought twice about it. She never thought she'd ever get caught. That morning, before her shift, she had met with Greg in the parking lot of the station. There's been a string of purse snatchings, he had told her, scrolling through his phone. All suspects described as young black males. We got a bolo out, Karen scoffed, rolling her eyes. They're always up to something. Greg had chuckled. Yeah, well, we gotta catch one in the act. Karen leaned against the squad car, lighting another cigarette. Close enough counts. Greg paused. What do you mean? She smirked. If you stop the right one, no one asks questions. Greg hesitated, but nodded slowly. He had known Karen for years. She had a reputation for being aggressive, but she always got away with it. That was the day Jamal Carter became her target. That was the day her world started to crack. Back in the courtroom, Karen rushed out into the hallway, her phone already in her hand. She dialed a number. It rang once before a deep voice answered. What? We have a problem, she whispered. The voice on the other end sighed. Handle it. Karen's grip tightened on the phone. The footage was leaked. Silence. Then, who? Karen exhaled sharply, glancing back into the courtroom. Her eyes landed on Jamal and his lawyer. The kid. Ann Grayson. The voice hummed. Find a way to fix it. Click. The line went dead. Karen shoved her phone into her pocket, her pulse racing. Fix it. She knew exactly what that meant. As she turned back toward the courtroom, her mind raced. If the footage was out, if the judge ruled against her, her career was over. She couldn't let that happen. She wouldn't let that happen. And if that meant making sure Jamal Carter never saw his day in court, so be it. Meanwhile, Jamal sat beside his lawyer, a strange feeling creeping up his spine. Karen had left the courtroom looking angry. No, desperate. Malcolm Grayson leaned in. Stay close to your mother, Jamal, he murmured, his voice low. Jamal's stomach turned. You think she's gonna do something? Malcolm's jaw tightened. I think she's already planning it. The tension in the courthouse was thick, like a storm about to break. People whispered in hushed voices, reporters scribbled notes furiously, and officers avoided eye contact with anyone who might ask them uncomfortable questions. Jamal Carter sat between his mother and Malcolm Grayson, his heart pounding. He didn't trust Karen Willis, not for a second. The way she had stormed out, the desperate look in her eyes. Something about it sent chills down his spine. His mother, Lisa Carter, squeezed his hand tightly. "Stay close to me, baby," she whispered. Malcolm nodded. "We'll see this through. But be careful. This isn't just about the case anymore." Jamal swallowed hard. He didn't like the way that sounded. Karen Willis stepped into a dimly lit corridor behind the courthouse, where only a few officers were allowed. She leaned against the cold wall, her fingers tapping against her thigh as she thought. She needed a plan. Fast. The evidence against her was undeniable. The footage showed everything. The wrongful arrest, the mocking, the abuse of power. But she wasn't about to let her life crumble over some punk kid. Not now. Not ever. She pulled out her phone again, her fingers shaking slightly as she dialed a number. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "This better be good, Willis." Karen took a deep breath. "I need a favor." A pause. What kind of favor? She glanced over her shoulder to make sure no one was around. The kid, Jamal Carter. "He needs to disappear." Silence. Then, a chuckle. "Disappear? Huh?" Karen's grip on the phone tightened. "You know what I mean." The man on the other end sighed. "This is messy, Willis. Cameras are all over this case. If something happens to him now, people will start looking." Karen's jaw clenched. "I don't care. Just handle it." The man hummed in thought. "You're lucky we go way back." Karen exhaled. "Can you do it or not?" "Relax. We'll take care of it." A click. The call ended. Karen shoved her phone into her pocket and straightened her uniform, her mind racing. Soon, Jamal Carter wouldn't be a problem anymore. And once he was gone, the case would fall apart. No witness, no trial, no consequences. Jamal and his mother walked out of the courtroom, their lawyer close behind. The crowd outside was bigger than before. Reporters, activists, people who had seen the footage and wanted justice. "Jamal, over here." "Miss Carter, how do you feel about the case? Do you think the judge will rule in your favor?" Lisa tightened her grip on Jamal's hand. "Keep walking," she murmured. Malcolm guided them toward the parking lot. "I have a bad feeling about this," he said under his breath. Jamal's chest felt tight. "About what?" Malcolm's eyes darted around. "Karen Willis. She's desperate, and desperate people do dangerous things." As they reached Lisa's car, a black SUV pulled up at the curb. The back window rolled down slightly. Jamal's stomach dropped. A man sat in the back seat, his face mostly hidden in shadow. But Jamal caught the glint of something metallic in his lap. A gun. Malcolm must have seen it too because he grabbed Lisa's arm. "Get in the car. Now." Lisa hesitated. "What? Now?" Jamal barely had time to react before Malcolm yanked open the car door and pushed him inside. Just as the door slammed shut, bang, bang. Officer Karen Willis threw back her head and laughed, the sound bouncing off the cold walls of the police station. She leaned against her desk, her arms folded across her chest, watching the young black teen sitting in handcuffs on the bench across from her. His face was bruised, his lips slightly swollen. He sat silently, his eyes locked on the floor, refusing to meet her gaze. "You should have seen the way he begged," she said, shaking her head as she glanced at her fellow officers. "Crying, swearing he didn't do anything." She rolled her eyes dramatically before mocking his voice. "Please, please, I didn't steal nothing." The officers chuckled, some shaking their heads, others simply amused by her performance. The boy, 14-year-old Jamal Carter, clenched his fists but said nothing. He had learned a long time ago that words didn't matter when people like her had already made up their minds. Karen smirked, then leaned in close, whispering so only he could hear. "No one's gonna believe you, kid. It's your word against mine." But what Officer Willis didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the entire arrest had been caught on camera. Not just any camera. The courtroom security footage from an earlier case had accidentally recorded everything. And when the judge played the footage in court, the entire room went silent. Everything, every brutal moment, every racist word, every smug laugh, was there for the world to see. Karen Willis's smirk vanished in an instant. Hours before that shocking courtroom reveal, the day had started like any other for Jamal. He had woken up early, the morning light creeping through the broken blinds of his bedroom. His mother, working the night shift at the hospital, wasn't home yet. His little sister, Mia, was still asleep, curled up in their shared bed, her tiny frame rising and falling with each breath. Jamal was used to being the man of the house while his mom worked. He made breakfast, peanut butter on toast, the only thing left in the kitchen, and placed a plate on the table for Mia when she woke up. Then, he grabbed his backpack and headed out the door, his sneakers slapping against the pavement as he walked to school. But he never made it there. As he turned the corner onto Main Street, a police car suddenly screeched to a stop in front of him. "Hands where I can see them." Jamal froze. Before he could even react, Officer Karen Willis and her partner, Officer Greg Tully, jumped out of the vehicle, their hands on their holsters. "You match the description," Karen said as she stormed toward him. Jamal's heart pounded. What? Black hoodie, jeans about yay high. She gestured with her hand to indicate his height. "Looks like we got ourselves a little thief." "I didn't steal anything." Jamal's voice cracked, panic setting in. Karen smirked. "Yeah, that's what they all say." Before he could say another word, she grabbed his arm, yanking it behind his back. The roughness made him stumble. His cheek slammed against the cold pavement as her knee pressed into his back. "Stop resisting." "I'm not resisting," he gasped, his lungs struggling to pull in air. Greg Tully leaned down. "Shut up, kid." Tears burned at the edges of Jamal's eyes, but he refused to let them fall. People walked past, some slowing down to watch, but no one stepped in. No one helped. Then, from inside the nearby bodega, Mr. Rodriguez, the store owner, rushed out, waving his arms. "Wait, you got the wrong boy. That's not him." Karen didn't even look up. "Mind your business." "But," "I said mind your business." She twisted Jamal's wrist harder, making him yelp. Greg shook his head. "Cameras don't lie, Rodriguez. We got footage of a kid robbing a woman's purse a few blocks from here." Jamal's breathing was ragged. "I swear, I was just going to school." Karen scoffed. "Sure you were." The handcuffs clicked into place. As she pulled him to his feet and shoved him toward the squad car, Jamal caught sight of a phone. Someone had been recording. A young woman, maybe in her 20s, stood frozen on the sidewalk, her phone raised slightly. Their eyes met. She hesitated. Karen noticed and turned to her, flashing a sweet, harmless smile. "Just another punk off the streets, ma'am. You're welcome." The woman lowered her phone. And just like that, Jamal was shoved into the back of the squad car, the door slamming shut. The drive to the station was a blur. His hands hurt from the cuffs. His chest hurt from being slammed down. But more than anything, his heart hurt. No one had helped. No one had believed him. When they arrived, Karen had tossed him onto the station bench like a rag doll, laughing and joking with the other officers. That was when she had mocked him. That was when she had whispered that chilling line. "No one's gonna believe you." But she had no idea what was coming. The courtroom was packed. The judge, an older man with a stern expression, tapped his gavel. "Quiet." Karen Willis sat at the witness stand, her face calm, confident. Greg Tully sat beside her, nodding along. Jamal sat between his mother and their lawyer, hands clenched. The woman who had recorded the arrest was there, too. She sat nervously in the back, her phone in her hands. And then, the judge turned toward the screen. "Play the footage." The courtroom fell silent. And then, the screen flickered to life. The footage wasn't from the woman's phone. It was from a security camera. A high-quality, crystal-clear recording from inside a nearby courtroom, facing right toward the street. And it showed everything. It showed Jamal walking, earbuds in, minding his business. It showed the police car nearly hitting him as it screeched to a stop. It showed Karen Willis stepping out, smirking, hand already reaching for her cuffs before she even spoke to him. And then, it showed her brutal takedown, her knee digging into his back, her hand twisting his wrist far too hard. The courtroom gasped. Karen's confident smile twitched. Then, the footage kept playing. And now came the worst part. The station footage. Unbeknownst to Karen, security cameras had captured the entire booking process. It showed her laughing, mocking, imitating Jamal's desperate cries, while her fellow officers chuckled along. And then, clear as day, her leaning down, whispering to him, "No one's gonna believe you, kid." A deep, terrible silence filled the room. Jamal's mother covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. The judge's face turned red with rage. Karen's smirk was gone. Her hands gripped the sides of her chair, knuckles white. And then, "Officer Willis." The judge's voice was ice-cold. "Explain yourself." The courtroom doors burst open. Reporters flooded in. Cameras flashed. The truth was out. And Karen Willis? She wasn't laughing anymore. Karen Willis sat frozen in the witness stand, her confident smirk completely wiped away. The room felt smaller, suffocating. The once amused officers in the courtroom shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The judge's gaze burned into her. "Officer Willis," he repeated, his voice sharp with controlled fury. "Explain yourself." Karen opened her mouth, but no words came out. Jamal sat beside his mother, his fists clenched in his lap. His lawyer, a tall, composed black man named Malcolm Grayson, leaned forward slightly. "Your Honor, I believe we all saw the same footage," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I'd like to formally request that Officer Willis be held accountable for excessive force, false arrest, and—" Gunshots rang out. People screamed. The SUV sped off, tires screeching against the pavement. Jamal's heart pounded as he ducked low in the back seat. His mother was shaking, gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. Malcolm crouched beside the car, checking his side. "I'm good," he muttered. "You two okay?" Lisa could barely speak, her breaths coming out in shaky gasps. Jamal's ears rang from the sound of the shots. His hands trembled. Someone had just tried to kill him, and he had no doubt who was behind it. Officer Karen Willis. This wasn't just about a wrongful arrest anymore. This was war. Karen sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel tightly, waiting for the call. Her phone vibrated. She snatched it up. "Well?" The voice on the other end sighed. It didn't work. Karen's breath caught in her throat. "What?" "The kid's still alive." Her grip on the phone tightened until her knuckles turned white. "You promised me this would be handled." "Relax, Willis. Accidents happen. We'll try again." Karen's pulse raced. "Try again? You don't get it. This kid is ruining my life. I need him gone." The man chuckled darkly. "Then maybe you should do it yourself." Click. The call ended. Karen's breath came in ragged gasps. Jamal Carter was still breathing, but not for long. She'd make sure of it. Jamal sat in his mother's car, his heart still racing from the gunshots. His hands were shaking, his breath uneven. Someone had just tried to kill him. Lisa Carter gripped the steering wheel so tightly her fingers turned white. She was still in shock, her eyes darting toward the rearview mirror every few seconds. Malcolm sat in the front seat, his jaw clenched, scanning the street like a man who had seen this kind of thing before. "Mom," Jamal finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "What just happened?" Lisa exhaled shakily, trying to keep herself from breaking down. "We need to get somewhere safe." Malcolm nodded. "Drive. Now." Lisa didn't need to be told twice. She slammed her foot on the gas, peeling out of the courthouse parking lot, her eyes darting from mirror to mirror. Jamal turned his head, watching as the black SUV disappeared down a side street. Whoever was in that car had wanted him dead, and he already knew who was behind it. Officer Karen Willis. Back at the police station, Karen sat alone in the locker room, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her face was pale, her normally cocky smirk nowhere to be found. This was slipping out of her control. Jamal Carter was supposed to be gone. Instead, he was still breathing. And the more he lived, the more danger she was in. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She grabbed it immediately. The message was from an unknown number. "You're losing control." Karen's stomach twisted. She typed back quickly. "Handle it. Now." 3 dots appeared. A reply. Already in motion. Karen exhaled and tightened her ponytail. She couldn't afford another mistake. The next attempt wouldn't fail, because this time, she'd be there herself. Lisa's car swerved onto a side road, heading toward their neighborhood. Malcolm kept his eyes on the mirrors. "We're not going to your house." Lisa glanced at him sharply. "What?" They know where you live, Malcolm said. If we go there, we're sitting ducks. Lisa bit her lip, gripping the wheel. Then where? My place, Malcolm said. For now. Jamal sat stiffly in the back seat, his mind still replaying the gunshots. Someone wanted him dead. And not just anyone. A cop. A cop who had laughed while arresting him. A cop who had told him no one would believe him. A cop who had just sent someone to kill him. His fists clenched. For the first time, it wasn't just fear running through his veins. It was anger. They arrived at Malcolm's apartment, a secure high-rise in the city, with a security desk and cameras everywhere. We're safer here, Malcolm said as they stepped inside. At least for now. Lisa collapsed onto the couch, rubbing her temples. Malcolm, what do we do? Jamal sat across from her, still silent. Malcolm paced. First, we breathe. Second, we need to make sure this story gets out before Karen can cover it up. That footage in the courtroom was a start, but she's desperate now. Jamal finally spoke. She tried to have me killed. His voice was steady, cold. Lisa's breath hitched, but she didn't argue. Malcolm nodded grimly. Yeah, and that means she won't stop. Jamal stared at the floor, his mind spinning. She wanted him dead because he was the only thing standing between her and the truth getting out. But what if? What if he wasn't just running anymore? What if, instead of hiding, he exposed her first? He looked up. I have an idea. Malcolm raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. Jamal took a deep breath. We take the fight to her. Karen sat in her car outside the precinct, gripping her steering wheel as she checked her messages. Another text had come through. He's hiding, but not for long. Karen smirked. Good. Because the next time she saw Jamal Carter, she'd make sure he didn't walk away. Jamal sat on the couch in Malcolm's apartment, his mind racing. His mother paced the room, still shaken, her hands trembling as she tried to process everything that had happened. Take the fight to her? Malcolm repeated, rubbing his chin. That's a bold move, kid. Lisa's head snapped toward Jamal. No, absolutely not. Jamal met her eyes. Mom. No, she cut him off. I just had to watch someone try to kill my baby in broad daylight. You think I'm about to let you go after her? Her voice cracked, her fear pouring out in every word. Malcolm sighed. Lisa, I get it. But Jamal's right. Lisa turned on him. You're taking his side? I'm taking the truth side, Malcolm said, his tone firm. Karen Willis is desperate. The only way we beat her is if we make sure everyone sees what she's doing. Lisa's hands trembled. She's a cop, Malcolm. She already tried to kill my son once. What if she tries again? Jamal's jaw clenched. She will try again. That's why we have to make sure she doesn't get the chance. Lisa stared at him, her eyes filled with fear. But Jamal was done being afraid. He was done running. Karen sat in the back of the police station, scrolling through her phone. Her heart pounded in her chest, her pulse racing with frustration. The hit on Jamal had failed. That meant he was still out there, still breathing, and still a threat. Her phone buzzed. Still no sign of him. Karen gritted her teeth. She needed another plan. Something bigger. Something that would make sure Jamal Carter never got another chance to open his mouth. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to think. Then, an idea formed. A fire. A simple accident. A tragedy. Jamal Carter and his family wouldn't live long enough to see the end of this case. She smiled to herself. This time, she'd do it right. Back at Malcolm's apartment, Jamal sat at the dining table, his mind focused. If we're gonna take her down, we need to go public, he said. And I don't mean just in court. I mean everywhere. Social media. News outlets. Make it impossible for her to cover this up. Malcolm nodded. I know a few journalists. People who want stories like this. Lisa exhaled sharply. This is insane. Jamal turned to her. Mom, she's not gonna stop. If we don't act first, she'll come for us again. Lisa swallowed, looking between her son and Malcolm. Then, after a long pause, she nodded. All right, she whispered. We fight. Jamal felt his heart tighten. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about justice. An hour later, Malcolm was on the phone with a journalist. Jamal sat next to him, listening intently. I've got a case for you, Malcolm said into the phone. Big story. Corrupt cop. Attempted murder. Racism. Everything you could ask for. The voice on the other end hesitated. This about that footage in court? Exactly. The journalist chuckled. Yeah, I saw it. Crazy stuff. You got more? Oh, we got more, Malcolm said, his eyes meeting Jamal's. The journalist paused. All right, he finally said. I'm listening. Meanwhile, Karen was already in motion. She sat in her car outside Lisa Carter's house, watching. No one was home. Perfect. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small bottle of lighter fluid. She stepped out of the car, her heart hammering in her chest. No cameras. No witnesses. Just her. And the fire she was about to set. She doused the front porch, the smell of gasoline filling the air. Then, she pulled out a match. She struck it against the box. A small flame flickered to life. She smirked, and then, she dropped it. Whoosh! The flames exploded, licking up the walls of the house instantly. Karen stepped back, admiring her work as the fire roared to life. By the time they found out, it'd be too late. Jamal Carter wouldn't have a home to go back to. Lisa's phone rang. She picked it up, distracted. Hello? The voice on the other end was frantic. Lisa, your house, it's on fire. Lisa froze. Her blood ran cold. Jamal and Malcolm turned toward her as her phone slipped from her fingers. Then, before anyone could speak, she screamed. The air around Lisa Carter went still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Her phone fell to the floor with a soft clatter, but she didn't even notice. The words on the other end of the line, "Your house is on fire," kept replaying in her mind like an echo that wouldn't stop. She barely registered the sound of Jamal calling her name. Mom, what's wrong? Her heart was racing, her hands shaking. The world felt like it was spinning as her mind tried to process the news. Her house, the place she had worked so hard to build for her children. Her sanctuary, gone. No, Lisa whispered. Her breath came in quick, shallow bursts as the room seemed to close in on her. It can't be. Jamal jumped to his feet, panic flashing across his face. We need to go now. Malcolm stood up, grabbing his phone. We need to know where it is. Stay here. He made a quick call, his voice a low murmur in the background. Jamal's eyes stayed on his mother. Mom, we need to go. Lisa turned to him, the tears already welling up in her eyes. Jamal, what if it's too late? What if they... No, Jamal said, his voice firm. We're not giving up. The flames licking at their memories were too much to ignore. Karen Willis was the one who had tried to destroy their family, who had taken everything from them, and now she was trying to burn it all down. Jamal's heart pounded as he realized just how far she was willing to go. Mom, we're going to fight her, he said, his words steady despite the turmoil inside him. We'll make sure everyone knows what she did, and we'll stop her together. Lisa's face crumbled, her resolve breaking down for a moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. Jamal didn't wait for any more words. We're going now. The fire trucks arrived in the distance, their sirens growing louder as they neared the block where Lisa Carter's house stood. The smell of smoke was already thick in the air, and a plume of dark gray smoke rose from the middle of the neighborhood, blackening the sky. By the time they reached the scene, the house was already consumed by flames. The firefighters were rushing to battle the blaze, but Jamal could see that it was too late. The roof had collapsed in on itself, and the windows were shattered, flames pouring from every crevice. He felt a sick feeling in his stomach. His childhood home, the place where he and his sister had laughed and played, was burning to the ground. Stay in the car, Jamal, Malcolm ordered, his voice tight. Let me handle this. But Jamal was already out of the car before Malcolm could finish speaking. He wasn't going to sit back and watch. Not now. Not after everything. Jamal, wait. But Jamal was already running, the sound of his footsteps drowned out by the roaring fire. His feet pounded the pavement as he ran toward the fire trucks, the flashing red and blue lights blinding him for a moment. Jamal, get back. A firefighter yelled, blocking his path, but Jamal pushed past him, his eyes scanning the scene. He needed to see if anyone was still inside. His heart thudded in his chest as he saw a familiar face. A neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, stood by the sidewalk, her eyes wide with panic. She saw him and hurried over. "Jamal, I'm so sorry. I tried to warn you." "But," Mrs. Jenkins's voice wavered, "I saw them. 2 men, hooded, running away from your house right before the fire started." Jamal's breath caught in his throat. His hands clenched into fists. Hooded men. The thought hit him like a punch in the gut. "Who were they?" Jamal asked, his voice urgent. Mrs. Jenkins shook her head. "I couldn't tell. They were fast." Her voice broke. "But I swear, Jamal, they were headed toward your house." Jamal's mind flashed to Karen Willis. Her angry words. The threats. The desperation he had seen in her eyes earlier. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a random act of violence. Karen Willis had orchestrated this. She had tried to burn them out of existence. His eyes went to the flames once again. His home was gone, but she wasn't going to get away with it. Not this time. Jamal turned on his heel and started back toward the car. "What are you doing?" Malcolm called from the distance, his voice laced with concern. "I'm going after her," Jamal said, his voice unwavering. Malcolm's eyes widened. "No, Jamal. You need to stay here. The police. The police are the last people I trust right now." Jamal's voice was filled with anger, but also determination. "I'm not going to let her get away with this." Lisa, standing behind Malcolm, looked on in horror. "Jamal, please, we need to stay safe. We need to regroup." But Jamal shook his head. "I'm done hiding, Mom. I'm done being scared. She took everything from us. I'm going to make sure she pays for it." And with that, Jamal walked away. Karen Willis sat in her car, parked a few blocks away, watching the scene unfold. She grinned to herself as the fire department worked tirelessly to put out the flames. The fire had been a success. The Carter family had nowhere to go now, no home to return to. And Jamal? He was probably out there somewhere, completely shattered, already giving up. But Karen wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. She had a feeling that Jamal wouldn't just sit back. He was stubborn, and that made him dangerous. Still, it was only a matter of time before he came crawling to her. She had the power. She had the control. Jamal would break, just like everyone else. But for now, Karen had more pressing things to deal with. Her phone buzzed again. "The boy is still alive. He's headed your way." Karen's smile faded. She had underestimated him. This time, she wouldn't make the same mistake. This time, she'd make sure Jamal Carter never saw another day of freedom. Jamal walked down the street, his fists clenched at his sides. The cool night air did nothing to calm the rage burning inside him. His home was gone. Everything his mother had worked for, everything, had gone up in flames. And he knew exactly who was behind it. Karen Willis. He wasn't going to let her get away with this. Malcolm's car pulled up beside him, tires screeching as it came to a stop. The door swung open. "Jamal, get in." Malcolm's voice was sharp, but not angry, concerned. "You can't go after her like this. You need a plan." Jamal hesitated for only a second before jumping in. He knew Malcolm was right. Charging in without thinking would only get him killed. As soon as he was in, Malcolm sped off. Lisa was in the passenger seat, wiping tears from her face. Her voice was hoarse. "Baby, where are we even supposed to go now?" Jamal swallowed hard. "We don't need a home. We need justice." Lisa turned to him, her eyes filled with grief. "Jamal, I don't care about the house. I care about you." Malcolm's grip on the wheel tightened. "Listen, kid, I want to take her down as much as you do. But we can't just walk into the police station and say, 'Hey, this racist cop burned our house down. Do something about it.'" Jamal's jaw tightened. "Then we don't go to the cops. We go above them." Malcolm frowned. "What are you thinking?" Jamal took a deep breath. "We make her famous. I mean everywhere. National news, social media, people who actually care about justice. If she thinks she can cover this up, we make it so big that she can't." Lisa wiped her eyes. "But how?" Jamal turned to Malcolm. "You said you know a journalist. We go to them. We give them everything, the footage, the threats, the hitmen she sent after me. And most importantly, we tell them that if anything happens to me next, everyone will know exactly who did it. Malcolm nodded slowly. That's risky. Jamal's gaze was fierce. So is doing nothing. Karen Willis paced her apartment, phone in hand. Her contact had confirmed it. Jamal was still alive. And he wasn't hiding. He was coming for her. Her fingers drummed against the table as she thought. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to be too scared to fight back. He was supposed to disappear, just like all the others. But he wasn't. And that made him dangerous. Her phone buzzed. We found him. A slow smile spread across her lips. She grabbed her coat and left without another word. This time, she'd make sure the job was finished. Malcolm's contact, a journalist named Ava Reynolds, met them at a small coffee shop on the edge of town. She was young, but sharp, with piercing brown eyes that missed nothing. She slid into the booth across from them, setting down her phone. I heard about the fire, she said, her voice serious. I assume that wasn't an accident? Jamal shook his head. No, and I think you already know who did it. Ava nodded. Karen Willis. Lisa exhaled shakily. She's trying to destroy us. Ava leaned forward. Then let's make sure she doesn't. Tell me everything. For the next hour, they laid it all out. Jamal's arrest, the leaked courtroom footage, the threats, the hitmen, and now, the fire. Ava took notes furiously, nodding as they spoke. When they finished, she sat back, exhaling. This is huge. If we break this, the department won't be able to protect her anymore. Malcolm frowned. But what if she tries something again? Ava smirked. That's why we're not just doing an article. Jamal's brow furrowed. What do you mean? She slid her phone across the table. On the screen was a live streaming platform. We're going live. Lisa's breath caught. Now. Ava nodded. If she knows this is coming, she'll try to shut it down before it airs. We don't give her that chance. We tell the world right now. Jamal looked at Malcolm. Malcolm looked at Lisa. Lisa hesitated. Then, slowly, she nodded. Let's do it, Jamal said. Ava tapped her phone. And just like that, they were live. Karen had just stepped out of her car when she felt her phone buzz again. She ignored it. She already knew where Jamal was. It was only a matter of time before she caught up with him. Then, another buzz. And another. She frowned, finally pulling it out. Her heart stopped. Her name was trending. Hashtag Justice for Jamal. Live now. Black teen speaks out after wrongful arrest, attempted murder, and police corruption. Karen's stomach twisted. She clicked the link. And there he was. Jamal Carter. Telling the world everything. Her hands clenched into fists. She had lost control. But not for long. Karen grabbed her gun and stormed back to her car. She was going to end this before it was too late. Back in the coffee shop, Ava's phone blew up with notifications. People are watching. Malcolm kept his eyes on the street. We need to move. Jamal nodded. Then, through the window, he saw it. A black car. Karen Willis. She had found them. Jamal's breath caught. She's here. Lisa gasped. Malcolm cursed under his breath. Ava grabbed her phone. We stay live. Karen stepped out of the car, her hand on her gun. Jamal's heart pounded. This was it. It was her versus the truth. And this time, he wasn't backing down. Jamal's pulse pounded in his ears as Karen Willis stepped out of the black car, her uniform crisp, her hand resting on the gun at her hip. The air in the coffee shop seemed to thicken, time slowing as the weight of the moment pressed down on him. Lisa's hand clamped over her mouth. Malcolm cursed under his breath. Ava, still holding her phone, kept the live stream running, her fingers tightening around the device. She's gonna try something, Malcolm muttered. We need to go. No, Ava said firmly. She's exposed. If she does anything on camera, she's finished. Jamal swallowed hard. He could see it in Karen's eyes. She wasn't just here to scare them. She was here to end this. To end him. And she wasn't even trying to hide it. Karen adjusted her badge as she walked, her face calm, confident, the expression of a woman who had gotten away with too much for too long. She stepped into the coffee shop. The entire room went silent. She scanned the small space, her gaze settling on Jamal. Then, she smiled. Evening, she said, her voice casual. like they were old friends meeting by chance. Didn't expect to find you here. No one spoke. Karen's eyes flicked to the phone in Ava's hand. You're live, aren't you? She asked, tilting her head. Ava didn't flinch. That's right. The whole world is watching. Karen chuckled softly, shaking her head. The whole world? Bit dramatic, don't you think? Jamal clenched his fists. Dramatic? You sent people to kill me. Karen raised an eyebrow. That's a strong accusation. Lisa, finally finding her voice, stood up. You burned our house down. Karen sighed, shaking her head. That's terrible news. Really? But I had nothing to do with it. Malcolm scoffed. Then why are you here? Karen's eyes stayed on Jamal. To talk. Jamal didn't trust a single word that came out of her mouth. You think I'm stupid? Karen smirked. No, actually, you're smart. Smarter than I gave you credit for. She folded her arms, leaning against the counter like she owned the place. See, the problem with smart people? They don't know when to quit. Jamal's skin crawled at the way she said it, like it was a warning or a threat. Lisa stepped in front of Jamal protectively. You stay away from my son. Karen ignored her. Here's the deal, kid, she said smoothly. You drop this. You stop the live stream. You walk away. Jamal felt something inside him snap. You think I'm just gonna let you get away with this? His voice shook with anger. Karen sighed, glancing around the coffee shop. Jamal, let's be real here. You can't win. Ava kept her phone steady, recording everything. You see, Karen continued, the world doesn't work the way you think it does. The people watching this? She gestured toward Ava's phone. They'll be mad for a while. Maybe they'll protest. Maybe they'll post a hashtag. And then? She smirked. They'll forget. Jamal's hands clenched into fists. Karen leaned in slightly. But you? You won't forget. You'll keep pushing. You'll make yourself a bigger target. And I promise you, kid, if you keep coming for me, you won't live to see next week. The room went still. The words hung in the air like poison. Lisa gasped. Malcolm took a sharp step forward. Ava's mouth fell open. And the live stream? Still rolling. Karen blinked. She had just threatened a minor on camera. Jamal saw the realization hit her, saw the flicker of panic in her expression. Ava grinned. You just ended yourself. Karen's face twitched. Then, she reached for her gun. Lisa screamed. Ava backed up. But Jamal? He didn't move. He refused to be afraid. The coffee shop door slammed open. Freeze. The room erupted into chaos. Uniformed officers stormed inside, their guns drawn. Karen's eyes darted around wildly. What the? Put your hands where we can see them, Willis. Karen turned to see who was shouting, and her blood ran cold. Standing in the doorway was Captain Henry Dawson, her boss. And behind him? More officers. Some of her own colleagues. But none of them looked like they were on her side. Karen lifted her hands slightly, her lips parting in shock. Cap. Don't say a word, Dawson growled. We saw the whole thing. Karen's breath hitched. The live stream. She had threatened a child. On video. And now, the law she had twisted, the badge she had abused. It had turned against her. Karen Willis, Dawson said coldly, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and attempted murder. Jamal's heart pounded as he watched. Karen's face went pale. This is a mistake, she said quickly. You know me, Dawson. I thought I did. Dawson's expression was grim. Two officers moved forward, their hands reaching for her arms. No, 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 Karen muttered, shaking her head. This isn't how this was supposed to go. For the first time, she was the one in cuffs. The metal clicked shut around her wrists. And suddenly, the officer who had laughed at Jamal's pain, who had told him no one would believe him, wasn't laughing anymore. As she was led past Jamal, her furious eyes locked onto his. This isn't over, she hissed. Jamal met her gaze. Yes, it is. Outside, reporters swarmed, cameras flashing. Lisa pulled Jamal into a tight hug, her shoulders shaking. Oh, baby, she sobbed. It's over. Jamal hugged her back. Malcolm patted Jamal's shoulder. You did good, kid. Ava, still holding her phone, smirked. This is everywhere now. Jamal finally let out a shaky breath. For the first time in days, he felt safe. Karen Willis was done. The truth had won. And he had survived. The city buzzed with the aftermath of Karen Willis's arrest. The footage of her threats had gone viral within hours. Every major news outlet picked it up. Social media exploded with hashtags. Hashtag Justice for Jamal. Hashtag Karen Willis exposed. Hashtag End Police Corruption. For the first time, the power she had wielded so carelessly turned against her. Jamal watched the news in Malcolm's apartment, his hands resting on his lap. Lisa sat beside him, still shaken. But there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Relief, but also fear. She's gone, Mom, Jamal said quietly. She can't hurt us anymore. Lisa exhaled. I know, baby. I know. But Jamal could feel it. The weight of what had happened still lingered in the air. The fire, the hitmen, the threats. Karen Willis was locked up, but something still didn't feel right. Karen sat in a dimly lit interrogation room, her wrists still cuffed. The cold metal of the chair pressed against her back. Across from her, Captain Dawson stood, arms crossed. She refused to look at him. Do you even understand what you've done? Dawson's voice was tight with anger. Karen smirked. I did my job. Your job? Dawson slammed his hands on the table, making her jump. Your job was to serve and protect, not abuse your power, not target a child, not try to have him killed. Karen scoffed, leaning back in her chair. You think this is over? Her voice was low, filled with something that sounded too much like confidence. You think putting me in cuffs fixes anything? Dawson narrowed his eyes. What are you talking about? Karen leaned forward. I wasn't working alone. The air in the room changed. Dawson's face hardened. Explain. Karen chuckled. Oh, now you want the truth? Her eyes gleamed with something almost satisfied. Let me tell you something, Captain. You may have caught me, but I was never the only one. Dawson stiffened. Karen smiled. You really think I had the power to make a hit on a kid all by myself? She tilted her head. You really think I was the only one covering things up? Dawson didn't move, but Karen could tell. He was listening. And that was her ticket out of this. I have names, she continued. People who helped me. People above me. Dawson's jaw clenched. Karen leaned back, stretching. You give me a deal, Captain? I'll give you every dirty cop in this department. Dawson exhaled sharply, pushing himself off the table. Then, he walked out. Karen smirked. She wasn't going down alone. Back at Malcolm's apartment, Lisa had fallen asleep on the couch, exhaustion finally overtaking her. Jamal stood at the window, staring out at the city lights. Malcolm walked up beside him. You should sleep. Jamal shook his head. I can't. Malcolm exhaled. I get it. You've been through hell. Jamal turned to him. It's not just that. Something doesn't feel right. Malcolm frowned. What do you mean? Jamal hesitated. She was too confident, he said. Even when she was arrested. Even when she was caught. Malcolm rubbed his chin. You think she has a plan? Jamal's gut twisted. I know she does. Malcolm's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression shifting. What is it? Jamal asked. Malcolm's voice was tight. She's talking. Jamal's stomach dropped. Talking. Malcolm turned to him. Karen Willis is naming names. Jamal's breath caught in his throat. If she wasn't the only corrupt cop, then that meant there were others. People who might not be happy that she was behind bars. People who might come after him. Lisa stirred on the couch, her face peaceful for the first time in days. Jamal clenched his fists. It wasn't over. Not yet. And now, he was the target. In the police station, Captain Dawson sat at his desk, listening to the names Karen Willis had given. His face turned pale. Some of these men, they were high-ranking. If what Karen was saying was true, this case was bigger than just her. Much bigger. And if they found out she was talking, they wouldn't just come after her. They'd come after everyone involved. Jamal sat on the couch, his mind racing. He thought it was over. He thought he could finally breathe. But now? Now, he was in more danger than ever before. Because Karen Willis had been just the beginning. And the real monsters were still out there. Watching. waiting, and they were coming for him next. The air inside Malcolm's apartment felt heavier, thicker, like a storm was closing in. The TV was muted, but the flashing headlines spoke loud enough. Officer Karen Willis in custody, exposing a web of corruption, more names expected to be released in police scandal. Young black teen's footage brings down a dirty cop. But what happens next? Jamal sat in silence, his mind racing. Karen Willis was in jail, but somehow, it still didn't feel like a win. Malcolm set his phone down. Captain Dawson confirmed it. Willis is giving up names. Lisa, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, sat up straighter. So this is bigger than her. Malcolm nodded. Way bigger. Jamal's fists clenched. How many? Malcolm hesitated. Enough to make people nervous. Jamal exhaled sharply, looking at his mother. Lisa was already shaking her head. Jamal, we need to lay low. If this is as deep as it sounds, we don't know who else is involved. Jamal gritted his teeth. He hated the idea of hiding. He was tired of running. But Lisa wasn't wrong. Dawson wants us protected, Malcolm added. He's saying we should leave town for a while. Jamal scoffed. So we're just supposed to disappear while the people who did this walk free? Lisa swallowed hard. I just don't want to lose you. Jamal's chest tightened. He knew his mother was scared. And after everything that had happened, the fire, the gunman, the threats, he didn't blame her. But something inside him refused to back down. Mom, if we leave, then they win. Lisa squeezed her hands together, looking torn. And if we stay, what happens when one of those dirty cops comes after you? A sudden knock at the door made everyone freeze. Malcolm grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter. Stay behind me. Jamal's breath caught as Malcolm edged toward the door, peeking through the peephole. Then, he relaxed. It's Dawson. Jamal exhaled. Malcolm unbolted the door, letting the captain inside. Dawson's face was tense, his uniform slightly rumpled, like he hadn't slept. We need to talk, Dawson said. Lisa crossed her arms. About what? Dawson rubbed his forehead. Willis gave up names. And some of them are still on duty. Silence. Jamal's stomach turned. Corrupt cops. Still out there. Still armed. And worse, still desperate. Dawson sighed. We're trying to get ahead of this, but the department's a mess. We don't know who we can trust. Malcolm's jaw tightened. Then that means they could come after Jamal. Dawson hesitated. Yes. Lisa inhaled sharply, gripping Jamal's arm. We need protection. Dawson nodded. We have a safe house set up. Just until this blows over. Jamal shook his head. No, we're not running. Lisa turned to him, eyes wide. Jamal. I'm done hiding, Jamal said firmly. If Willis is going down, so are the rest of them. Dawson studied him for a long moment. Then, to everyone's shock, he nodded. Then let's set a trap. Lisa gasped. Absolutely not. But Jamal's eyes lit up. How? Dawson pulled out his phone. These cops don't know they're being investigated yet. If we can make them think you're alone, vulnerable, they'll come to silence you before they get exposed. Lisa shook her head furiously. No, I will not let my son be bait. Jamal turned to her, eyes burning with determination. Mom, they were going to kill me anyway. Lisa let out a shaky breath. Jamal placed a hand over hers. I have to do this. She looked at him, her heart breaking. But deep down, she knew. Her son had already made his decision. She nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. Okay. Dawson turned to Malcolm. We set this up tonight. We make it look like Jamal's alone, staying at a motel. We'll have undercover officers watching. Malcolm exhaled. And if they show up? Dawson's face hardened. We take them down. Hours later, the plan was in motion. Jamal sat alone in a dingy motel room, the yellow glow of the bedside lamp casting long shadows across the floor. The blinds were cracked open just enough to let him see the parking lot. Malcolm and Lisa were nearby in an unmarked car, watching. Dawson's men were positioned in the area, ready to move at a moment's notice. Now, all they had to do was wait. Jamal's heart pounded as he stared at the door. Minutes ticked by. Then, headlights appeared in the parking lot. Jamal's pulse spiked. A black SUV. It pulled into a space near his room, the engine cutting off. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, the doors opened. 4 men stepped out. Jamal's throat tightened. They weren't in uniform. No badges. No flashing lights. But he knew exactly who they were. Dirty cops. And they were here to finish what Karen Willis had started. Jamal's hands trembled as he reached for his phone. "Mom," he whispered into the receiver. "They're here." Lisa's breath hitched. "Stay calm, baby." Dawson's voice came through the line. "We've got them in sight. Hold your position." Jamal's heart pounded as he heard footsteps outside. Then, bam, bam, bam. A fist slammed against the door. "Jamal Carter," a deep voice called. "Open up. We just want to talk." Jamal swallowed hard. This was it. The real fight had just begun. Jamal's breath came in short, sharp bursts. His fingers tightened around his phone as he stared at the door. Another knock. Bam, bam, bam. "Open up, kid," the deep voice said again, this time with more impatience. "We ain't got all night." Jamal swallowed hard. He could hear the weight in the man's voice. This wasn't a bluff. If he opened that door, he wouldn't be walking out alive. Outside, in the unmarked car, Lisa clutched Malcolm's arm. "We have to go in," she whispered urgently. "Wait," Dawson said from the radio, watching from his own position. "Let them make their move first." Lisa's breath shook. "That's my son in there." Dawson's jaw tightened. "Trust me." Inside the motel room, Jamal knew he had only seconds before they forced their way in. His phone was still live on the call with his mother. So he did the one thing they wouldn't expect. He spoke. "You really think I'm stupid?" Jamal said, his voice steady, loud enough for them to hear. Silence. Then, a low chuckle. "Come on, kid," another voice said. "This don't have to be hard." Jamal clenched his jaw. "Yeah? Well, you should know the whole world is watching." Outside, Lisa and Malcolm stiffened. Dawson's eyes widened. And the dirty cops outside the motel? They hesitated. Because for the first time, they weren't sure. Was someone watching? Was this being recorded? Had the kid outsmarted them? Jamal knew fear made people sloppy. He needed to keep them unsure. So he pushed harder. "I mean, y'all saw what happened to Karen Willis, right?" he continued. "She thought she had power too. Thought she could get away with it. Now look at her." A pause. Then, "Shut up," one of them muttered. Jamal smirked. He had them rattled now. "I wonder what happens when your names go public," he taunted. "I bet your bosses will throw you under the bus real fast. Just like they did her." More silence. Jamal could feel the tension shift. They were thinking now, weighing their options. And then, the doorknob jiggled. Jamal's breath caught. That was it. He ducked behind the bed just as the door burst open, splinters flying in all directions. 4 men stormed in, all dressed in dark clothing, guns drawn. Jamal pressed himself against the floor, trying to keep calm. Then, bang, bang, gunshots rang out. Jamal flinched, but the shots hadn't come from them. They'd come from outside. "Drop your weapons. Hands in the air." Dawson's voice roared over the chaos. Jamal's heart leaped. The trap had worked. Flashing lights flooded the room as officers in full tactical gear stormed in behind the corrupt cops. Within seconds, the men who had come to kill him were on the ground, their guns kicked away, their hands yanked behind their backs. Jamal didn't move, his body frozen. It was over. Lisa screamed from outside. "Jamal, baby." His mother shoved past the officers, running straight to him. She dropped to her knees, cupping his face, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Oh my God, baby, are you hurt?" Jamal shook his head, his whole body shaking. "I'm okay, Mom." Lisa hugged him tight, sobbing into his shoulder. Malcolm appeared behind her, his face tense but relieved. "Kid, you just stared death in the face." Jamal exhaled shakily. "Yeah." Dawson walked up, watching as his men secured the scene. "It's over," Dawson said. "We got him." Jamal looked at the men on the ground, men who should have protected him, but instead had tried to bury him. He swallowed hard. "Not yet," he muttered. Dawson raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Jamal's jaw tightened. "These aren't the only ones." Dawson's face darkened. I know. Lisa turned to him, eyes wide. You knew? Dawson let out a slow breath. Willis gave us names. A lot of names. But she didn't give up the ones above her. Lisa's face paled. Malcolm ran a hand over his face. Of course she didn't. She's trying to cut a deal. Jamal's stomach twisted. Karen Willis had already caused so much damage. But now, she was still trying to play the system. Trying to protect whoever was really in charge. Then we keep going, Jamal said firmly. Lisa turned to him, horrified. No, Jamal. You survived this. We're not pushing anymore. Jamal looked her in the eyes. Mom, they burned our house down. They sent people to kill me. His voice was steady. They won't stop until we stop them. Lisa swallowed hard. Malcolm rubbed his chin. So what's the next move? Dawson sighed. We dig. We keep the pressure on. He looked at Jamal. But kid, you need to lay low for real this time. Jamal smirked. Yeah. Dawson smirked back. Yeah. Lisa shook her head, pulling her son into another tight hug. Jamal let out a breath. He was alive. The dirty cops were exposed. But something inside him knew. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. Somewhere else in the city, inside a dimly lit office, a phone buzzed. A man in a dark suit picked it up, his expression unreadable. Willis talked. The voice on the other end said. The man exhaled slowly. I see. Silence. Then, what about the boy? A pause. He's still alive. The man tapped his fingers against the desk. Then fix it. Click. The line went dead. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. And the real enemy was still waiting in the shadows. Jamal knew it wasn't over. Even after Karen Willis was behind bars. Even after the dirty cops who tried to kill him were arrested. Even after the city erupted in outrage over the corruption that had finally been exposed. Something still felt off. Like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. And deep down, he knew why. The real people behind all of this, the ones in charge, were still out there. Waiting. Watching. Planning. And if they thought they were going to silence him, they had another thing coming. Lisa packed a small bag, stuffing in clothes for both her and Jamal. I don't care what Dawson says. We're leaving town. Jamal stood by the door, his fists clenched. Mom, I can't just run. Lisa turned to him, tears in her eyes. Jamal, please. You almost died. I know. Lisa's hands shook as she zipped the bag closed. I won't let them take you from me. Jamal swallowed hard. And I can't let them win. Lisa exhaled sharply. Baby, please, she whispered. Let's just go. Just for a little while. Jamal hated seeing her like this. But every part of him screamed that running wasn't the answer. I love you, Mom, he said softly. But I can't live in fear.